Grab a warm blanket, settle in, and prepare yourself for 4 eerie stories set in the coldest, darkest nights of winter. Let's dive in, if you dare.
It was a freezing night in the middle of January. Emily had just moved to a small cabin in the woods, hoping for some peace and quiet. The snow outside was thick, and her nearest neighbor was miles away. One night, as she was reading by the fire, she heard a faint knock at the window. Startled, she looked outside but saw nothing. Just the snow-covered ground and the trees swaying in the icy wind. Thinking it was just the wind playing tricks, she went back to her book. The next morning, Emily went outside to fetch some firewood. That's when she noticed something strange. There were footprints in the snow leading up to her window, but they didn't look normal. The prints were large, clawed, and didn't resemble any animal she'd ever seen. As she followed the tracks, her heart sank. They led straight to her window, but there were no tracks leading away. Whatever had been there hadn't left. That night, Emily barely slept. She kept hearing soft scratching sounds outside the cabin. And when she finally summoned the courage to look out the window, she saw 2 glowing eyes staring back at her. To this day, no one knows what creature had visited Emily that winter. But she swears she left that cabin and never went back. Stay tuned for the next story, it only gets scarier. Don't forget to subscribe to FearNest for more stories like this. A man named David worked as a taxi driver in a snowy mountain town. One winter night, he got a call to pick up a passenger from a remote area. The roads were icy, and the snow was falling heavily, but he needed the money. When he arrived, he saw a woman standing by the side of the road. She wore an old-fashioned coat and had her head wrapped in a scarf. She didn't say much, just gave him an address and sat silently in the back seat. As David drove, he tried to make conversation, but the woman barely responded. She only whispered a few words about how she needed to get home. Something about her seemed off. Her face was pale, her hands were ice cold, and her breath didn't fog up in the freezing air. When David finally reached the address, he turned around to tell her they'd arrived. But the back seat was empty. The woman had vanished. Shaken, David knocked on the door of the house. An elderly man answered, and when David described the woman, the man's face went pale. "That's my wife," he said. "She died in a snowstorm 20 years ago. You're not the first to bring her here." David quit his job the next morning. Winter nights can be beautiful, but they hide many secrets. And this next story will make you think twice about walking in the snow alone. On the outskirts of a small town, there was a lake that froze over every winter. Locals always warned people to stay away from it, but teenagers loved testing their courage by walking across the thin ice. One night, a group of friends decided to visit the lake. They dared each other to walk to the center, where the ice was the thinnest. At first, it was all fun and laughter, but then one of them, a boy named Jake, felt something beneath the ice. "It's moving," he whispered. The group laughed, thinking he was just trying to scare them. But then the ice started to crack, and a dark shape appeared under the surface. It looked like a hand, reaching up toward Jake. Before anyone could react, the ice gave way, and Jake fell into the freezing water. His friends tried to pull him out, but it was too late. He disappeared beneath the surface. When the police arrived the next day, they searched the lake but found no sign of Jake. The strangest part? The lake was frozen solid again, as if nothing had ever happened. To this day, locals say Jake's ghost can be seen walking on the ice, calling for help. And every winter, someone else goes missing near that lake. It was Christmas Eve, and Liam had rented a small, secluded cabin deep in the mountains to spend the holiday alone. He wasn't a fan of big celebrations or crowds. Just the thought of sitting by the fireplace, sipping hot cocoa, and watching the snowfall was all he wanted. The cabin was cozy, and the snowfall outside was heavy that night. As he sat by the fire, enjoying the quiet, there was a sudden knock at the door. Who could it be? He thought. The nearest town was over 10 miles away, and the snowstorm made it impossible for anyone to be out there. Cautiously, Liam opened the door. Standing on the porch was a man dressed in old, tattered clothes. His face was pale, almost gray, and he shivered violently. "Please," the man said in a weak voice, "I need shelter. The storm. It's too much." Feeling sorry for the stranger, Liam invited him inside. He gave the man a blanket and a cup of hot tea. The man sat silently by the fire, staring into the flames without saying much. His presence was unsettling, but Liam tried to ignore it. After a while, Liam noticed something strange. The man's clothes were bone dry. It didn't make sense. He had just come in from the snowstorm, but there wasn't a single drop of water on him. Before Liam could say anything, the man turned to him and smiled. His teeth were yellowed and sharp, and his eyes seemed empty. "You shouldn't have let me in," the man whispered. And then, just like that, the lights went out. The cabin was plunged into total darkness. When Liam finally managed to light a candle, the man was gone. The door was wide open, and the wind howled through the cabin. Liam searched everywhere but found no sign of his visitor. The next morning, as the storm cleared, Liam found footprints leading away from the cabin. They stopped abruptly in the middle of the snowy forest, as if the man had simply vanished. The locals later told him that every year, on Christmas Eve, a wandering spirit knocks on the doors of cabins, looking for someone to invite him in. Those who do are never seen again. Liam was lucky to survive, but he swears he'll never spend Christmas alone again. 5. Winter may be beautiful, but it's also the perfect time for chilling tales like these. Thanks for joining us on FearNest, where we bring your darkest nightmares to life. If you enjoyed these winter horror stories, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to FearNest. And if you have your own scary story to share, leave it in the comments. We might feature it in a future video. Until next time, stay warm and stay safe.